All right, so today we have a special guest known for his talk shows and documentaries. He's one of the most successful on air personalities of the 21st century. He's got some of the hottest takes around, and we're honored to have John Ziegler on with us today. John, how are you?
I'm all right. I don't know about that intro, but thank you very much.
Yeah, we maybe built it up a little bit. Could you sum up a little bit about who you are and your career for the people who don't know who you are?
Well, that's probably most people. I've had a very bizarre career. I actually started as a television sportscaster after graduating from Georgetown University, and I did that for several years in a couple different markets. Then I went into talk radio. Along the way, I wrote a couple of books. One actually was a sports book about a high school football team in Ohio. After being in several major markets and talk radio, I went into documentary films. That's probably where I became most well known nationally because I did a couple of very high profile films that placed me on the Today Show and interviews with Matt Lauer and some other cable news network interviews as well. And I'm also a writer. I write a column for Mediaite, which is really what I do with most of my time. These days, I also host a podcast. I was hosting a nationally syndicated radio show up until Donald Trump won the presidential election. Even though I'm a conservative, I'm an anti-Trump person, so I realized at that point it was kind of pointless to keep hosting a nationally syndicated talk radio show because basically talk radio is nothing more than cheerleading for Donald Trump these days. So I turned that into a podcast, and that's where we are today. So that's the short version of John Ziegler's career.
So has being somebody who's recently you've become more of a public figure and you've been vocal with your opinions, do you think that's changed you at all?
Changed me from what? I've been pretty vocal with my public opinions for a long time, and like I said, I started my career back in my early 20s and as a television sportscaster, where I was also pretty opinionated. But I assume you're referring to my involvement in the Penn State case, where I have become a very well-known / notorious in a lot of realms because my knowledge of the case surpasses probably anybody else's in the world. I have no connection to Penn State. I don't even like Penn State, although I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania and was a college football fan. But my knowledge is greater than anyone else's, and my opinion is different than anyone else's. And happen to be very positive that I'm right about it. So if that's what you're referring to, that definitely has changed me. The last 5 years have been rather hellish because I've been going basically one man against the world, uphill into the wind on ice with lead bricks around my feet, as the rest of the media hordes of ignorant morons attack me, having no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, so speaking of which, for those who aren't familiar as much with the Penn State case, can you talk a little about your findings and what you believe about that, and about the verdict and the rulings and stuff?
Well, my involvement in that was really an evolution. I live in California. Like I said, I have no connection to Penn State. I always kind of admired Joe Paterno from afar. But back in 2011 in November, when that story broke, I was looking at the television going, there's no way this is real. There's no way this makes any sense. And at the time, I was just referring to the Joe Paterno angle on this. I presume, like everybody else, that Jerry Sandusky must be guilty as hell, because how in the world could somebody of his stature get arrested on all these charges? It sounded horrible if it wasn't at least somewhat true. And as I got deeper and deeper into it, I did a documentary film called The Framing of Joe Paterno. The framing meant figuratively, not literally. I'm an anti-conspiracy person. I don't believe in conspiracies of any sort. And that film was based almost entirely on whether or not Joe Paterno was railroaded, which I strongly believe that he was. But as I got deeper and deeper into the case, I interviewed Jerry Sandusky twice in prison for a total of about 6 hours. Went on the Today Show twice with Matt Lauer to discuss the findings of each of those. And I reinvestigated basically the entire case, because I realized was that we forgot an incredibly important step in all this. Back in November of 2011, when the crap was hitting the fan, everyone immediately focused on Penn State and Joe Paterno. Everyone forgot about the first part of the equation, which is, was Jerry Sandusky actually guilty? And what I found, and it shocks a lot of people, some it doesn't shock, but most people are shocked by it. They think I'm crazy, though I know I'm not. What I found is not only is Jerry Sandusky innocent, it's not even close. And I would bet anything I have that I'm right about this. I lose zero sleep over having taken this position because it's, as I said, it's not even close, and I know I'm right. And it's the biggest travesty of justice that I've ever seen that didn't involve a direct killing or murder that I've ever heard of, certainly in the modern era. And it should disturb anybody that cares about truth or justice, because the truth and justice have both lost horrendously in this entire case from top to bottom. And now 4 innocent people are going to be spending at least some time in jail, and Jerry Sandusky will die in prison, all innocent, mostly because the media doesn't know what the hell they're doing anymore. The media is a bunch of complete, incompetent, corrupt morons.
The fake news.
Well, it's funny you use the Trump term, fake news. You know, Donald Trump and I met, actually, and he wrote me a supportive letter about my work on the Penn State case.
Oh, it's on your Twitter.
Yeah, if you look on my Twitter page, I put it up there somewhat sarcastically because I'm not a Trump fan. You know, if Trump knew all the details of the Penn State case, I'm sure he would believe it, because he believes in this concept of fake news. This is real fake news. Everything you've heard about Penn State is real fake news, not the fake news that Donald Trump likes to use to protect himself from criticism. This is real, true blue fake news, and it's all because the media became invested in a fake narrative, a false narrative, 5.5 years ago, and they love that narrative so much, and they rode that narrative so hard and so long, they can't let go of it. I referred many times to the media being 5-year-olds, and I'm telling them there's no Santa Claus. Good luck with that.
So how is it that it became so widely accepted that he was guilty? How do you suppose that is? That it's just, and the ruling, if, as you suggest, was so far off accurate?
Well, it's a great question, and you know, lots of people in lots of criminal cases say this is the one that slipped through the cracks, right? Somehow,
yeah.
Weirdly, this one we blew.
A lot of people say that.
I'm sorry?
Do a lot of people say that?
Well, I mean, there are many cases that's a claim that people make. Like,
oh, okay, yeah.
So, but I'm going to make a point here that I think is important. And the point here is that in this situation, there really is a very logical explanation for why justice fell through the cracks. This isn't just coincidence or bad luck. We have a very specific set of circumstances that are truly unique that allowed this to happen. And by far the most important factor that set these dominoes to fall in a very unjust direction was the firing of Joe Paterno on November 9th of 2011. That's what changes this case forever. When Jerry Sandusky gets arrested, and much to the surprise, I think, of the prosecution and to the state of Pennsylvania, it happens over a weekend. It's a football weekend. It's not big news because most people didn't remember who the hell Jerry Sandusky was outside of State College, Pennsylvania. It was only when ESPN focused the attention on Joe Paterno once the week started, and it's important to point out that week in November of 2011 was as slow a sports week as you're ever going to have in November because the NBA was on strike, baseball just ended, basketball had not started yet, no one cares about hockey, football, of course, was in its pre-playoff lull, and during the week in football season, you got nothing to talk about, and ESPN went 24/7, literally, on basically taking this 23-page grand jury presentment. And people who know about legal cases can tell you that a grand jury presentment is often not worth the paper it's printed on. It's basically the wild fantasies of the prosecution throwing up everything up against the wall they can to make it stick, or to create negative publicity for the defendant. And the media just pretended this was all fact. And when Joe Paterno gets fired, especially in the way that he got fired, which people don't remember, it was late at night, he gets fired over a cell phone. That night there's basically, although I think it's a misnomer, but they're referred to as riots in State College, which are completely misinterpreted. That series of events I refer to as a nuclear explosion on top of this case. Because think about it. How in the world are you supposed to get a fair trial when, as Jerry Sandusky, your former employer, just fired by far the most famous and revered person in the history of the university, who was your former boss, for something you allegedly did, by the way, in the middle of a very successful football season, in an absolutely ignominious fashion, and then Paterno dies 2 months later. So not only is Jerry Sandusky a pedophile, he's the pedophile who killed Santa Claus, for all, using the Santa Claus metaphor again. So, and the entire community of State College is being blamed for having looked the other way to enable a pedophile to help football. Jerry was so stupid, he thought that having a trial in State College with lots of Penn State people on the jury would help him. That was the worst thing you could possibly have done, because Penn Staters and people in State College needed to show the whole world how much they hated pedophilia, because they were being accused as a community of having put the welfare of children behind the success of the football team. Although how any of this related to the success of the football team is beyond me, because Jerry Sandusky was retired at the time of the major incident in this case, the only one that really involved Penn State, and frankly, the only one for which there was even remotely credible evidence, because there was a witness named Mike McQueary, who has made millions and millions of dollars for his involvement in this case. So anyway, that's a very long answer, but the reason why this case is unique, and it's still being felt its effects today, is because of the firing of Joe Paterno. Without the firing of Joe Paterno, none of this happens in the way that it does. Jerry Sandusky was convicted 7 months after the firing of Joe Paterno, 4 or 5 months after his death. No contingencies. That's unheard of in a case like this, in a very complex case. The defense had no chance. And this was the Salem witch trial. And I'm not talking about just reasonable doubt here, guys, okay? I don't care that much about reasonable doubt. It's an important concept, but The reality is that I wouldn't be putting my reputation and my life on the line here for reasonable doubt for a pedophile. He's innocent, and it's not close.
So you think that the story was made up? The pressure to fire Paterno was caused by a slow media week? Pretty much?
That was part of it. I mean, there was a perfect storm of circumstances.
Right.
You have a slow media week. You have ESPN, who is broadcasting Penn State's game with Nebraska in what would be Paterno's last home game that Saturday. So ESPN, which has a monopoly on sports news, also has a huge incentive to hype this game. And because they're broadcasting it live. So now they've got a stranglehold on the narrative. Let me give you an example of the power of ESPN. So in the midst of this firestorm, right, there are 2 people who are Penn Staters who have big media voices because they're on ESPN. Matt Millen and Todd Blackledge both played for Joe Paterno. Now, Millen is a douchebag, and, so I don't think anybody really would have been surprised that Millen didn't stand up to support Paterno. But Millen gave ESPN exactly what he wanted. They wanted at one point even crying on the set, which was just despicable because he didn't know anything about what was happening. And in fact, Matt Millen had been a honorary board member of Jerry Sandusky's charity. So if anybody should have been knowing about what Jerry Sandusky was about, it was Matt Millen. But Todd Blackledge is a guy who revered Joe Paterno, a guy who's an ardent Christian, a good guy. I've known a little bit, a guy who really believes in principles and should have been the guy to stand up and say, whoa, wait a minute. I know the people involved here. Can we just take a second and find out what the hell really happened? But Todd Blackledge didn't do that because Todd Blackledge was working at ESPN, and I think if hooked up to a lie detector test, I think even Todd would admit that he got kind of scared and was afraid by the culture there at ESPN, that what was going to happen to him if he didn't go along with what was clearly the company line on this. And so you have this incredible series of circumstances, this perfect storm, creating this forward momentum. And there were people at Penn State who, let's face it, Joe Paterno was 85 years old and wanted him to retire for a very long time. He should have retired well before what happened, and if he had done so, none of this would have occurred. But there were people, specifically John Surma, the head of U.S. Steel at the time, who was the vice chairman of the Board of Trustees, who had it out for Paterno for many years, who took advantage of this crisis, and who got rid of Joe Paterno. And it had nothing to do with the board at Penn State knowing or having any inside knowledge that somehow there was a cover-up here. It was simply a panic. They crapped their pants in the midst of this massive firestorm, and they did not want Joe Paterno on the sidelines on a live football game on ESPN that was going to be perceived by ESPN and portrayed by ESPN as a pep rally for a pedophile protector.
So,
yeah, but that firing changes everything, because not only is it perceived as a de facto guilty plea by Penn State, then after the dust settles and after Paterno dies especially, there's a whole bunch of people led by NFL Hall of Famer Franco Harris, who's I've become very close with in all of this, who now think that Joe Paterno got railroaded and they want an explanation from the board. So now the board has to come up with a reason for why they fired Joe Paterno. So what happens? They hire Louis Freeh, and Louis Freeh gets paid $6.5 million to come up with the Freeh report, and voila, magically, Louis Freeh gives the board exactly what they want, an explanation for firing Joe Paterno, which would not have been necessary if the board hadn't panicked and fired Paterno. But the Freeh report then sets the stage for a whole series of other events, including $100 million in settlements by Penn State, and also, I think the conviction and sentencing of these 3 Penn State administrators. That's still all based on the Freeh report, which is bullcrap. It's total bullcrap. It's not based in any sort of fact. But the media has never taken a look at this because they love the narrative so much. They're not going to question it. They're completely invested in it. They're invested in a mythology.
So you think that the media just needed sports news at the time, and that kind of spiraled into what turned out to be the end for Joe Paterno?
Well, again, I want to emphasize that's one small piece of this perfect storm. If there had been something else going on that week, then that's just the way the media works. They look at, what do we got going on? And if there's a bunch of things going on, they split the time. It's not focused all on one deal. Well, that week there was nothing else that was going to top or even come close to the downfall, this Greek tragedy of a legend, Joe Paterno. And so that was one element of many that created this unique circumstance, which is really the key to understanding the whole case. You can't understand this case unless you understand the impact of that firing of Joe Paterno on every aspect of the case. And again, I just ask people, how in the world would you ever get a fair trial if your legendary boss got fired in the way Joe Paterno did 7 months before your trial began, and then he died, and you got blamed for it. I mean, Jerry Sandusky no longer could even put on a defense. He goes from being, which is ironic since he was a defensive coordinator, right? He goes from being a revered member of the community to not being able to get his defense attorney's phone calls returned. Literally, he becomes toxic.
Well, how old was his defense attorney? If he was a 14-year-old kid, I wouldn't pick up. It was a joke.
Okay. All right,
sorry.
I'm happy to joke around with you, but I mean, if you have legitimate questions, I'm also happy to answer those.
Yeah. All right. So you think that that the media caused, or the perfect storm, as you said, caused Paterno to be fired, but what makes you think that Sandusky was innocent?
Well, the short answer to that is that in a case like this, where we are now 9 years after this investigation began, and this investigation has has had virtually every element of law enforcement and state institutions involved in it. And by the way, not just state institutions, but there was also a federal investigation for Graham Spanier's top secret security clearance, which, by the way, the former Penn State president just got sentenced to jail. His security clearance was extended after all this because the federal government found that there was no cover-up, no scandal, no concerns about his character at all. But here's my point. We've had 9 years of investigation and all this media scrutiny. In a case like this, in a modern era with electronic evidence, computers, cell phones, all sorts of other ways of getting evidence in a case like this, there should be O.J. Simpson-like evidence in this case. There should be no doubt. There should be massive amounts of evidence. Instead, there's literally nothing. Not only is there no evidence, there's not one story that remotely, of the accusers, that remotely makes sense, that remotely is consistent, and where there is anything that is remotely convincing at all. If you look at each of these stories one by one and you know the timeline and you see how they evolved and you see how one led to the other, it is incredibly easy to see what really transpired here, which is basically this. Here's what really happened. There was one guy named Aaron Fisher, victim number one. He ends up writing a book. And I urge people who care about this case to read the book. In fact, at a press conference outside of the courthouse at one of Jerry's appeal hearings, I actually literally gave copies of the book to members of the media and begged them to read it, because when you read this book, you realize, what the hell? This is all ludicrous. This book is absurd.
So are you saying that the testimonies are all like worthless, kind of? Are they all just coincidental, or what? What's the connection there?
I'm going to tell you what happened. So Aaron Fisher, I believe, gets convinced by people around him, including his welfare queen mother, and by his therapist, who's a quack, and by one female prosecutor. He gets convinced that if he lies about Jerry Sandusky, he's going to be believed. And he's smart enough to realize...
Perhaps right.
I'm sorry?
Perhaps he's right. I mean, a lot of people believe that. Whoever...
A lot of people believe what?
Him. I think that his testimony, a lot of the general public is going to listen to that.
Why do you believe Aaron Fisher?
I don't necessarily see like the motive he has to just make that thing up. Seems pretty traumatic to me. Not
really?
Something I would not want to share.
You want to know about Aaron Fisher's life right now?
Yeah, I don't know much about it, so yeah.
Aaron Fisher, well, you don't know anything about him, but I've investigated him thoroughly.
Okay.
Aaron Fisher, when this began, when he started coming forward as a 15-year-old, who was, by the way, a wrestling and track and field star, not a small little kid, a guy who was beating the crap out of a neighbor who used to try to wrestle him, who was in his mid-30s. So not a tiny little kid who can't defend himself. He was living in welfare housing, where the only thing he ever got that was outside the norm was an occasional gift of used golf clubs from Jerry Sandusky. He was living a horrible life with a mom who was a drunk, who barely paid any attention to him. Now he owns 2 giant houses right next to each other and a collection of very expensive sports cars, which is what he told everyone in his life he always wanted. He was obsessed with money from a very young age. And he knew well enough that this was a situation that could work out if people believed him. And if you read his own book, it's very clear he didn't want to say anything bad about Jerry, because he kept saying, no one's going to believe me, no one's going to believe me, because he wasn't telling the truth. What ends up happening, though, is eventually he realizes, geez, all these people really are going to believe this. And then his story completely changes. It explodes. It ends up to where he's telling at trial this preposterous story of where he was abused 100 times. 100 times at the age of 12, 13, and 14, which was completely different than any other story he had ever told before. And by the way, the prosecution itself, go watch the interview that the 2 prosecutors did with Armin Katayan of HBO Sports. They don't even mention Aaron Fisher's name. He's no longer the star of their case by the time they go to trial, because they became so frustrated by what a crackpot he was. He tried to testify 3 times in the grand jury, Aaron Fisher did. The first 2 times he couldn't do it. He couldn't answer any questions. He just broke down in tears. The 3rd time he had to read his testimony with his therapist sitting right there. I guarantee you the therapist wrote it for him. I'm convinced even the prosecution doesn't believe Aaron Fisher, but they somehow rationalized in their brain that Aaron Fisher is just as important as every other kid, and even if he's not telling the truth, we got all these others that must be telling the truth. But that's not logical, because when you understand the timeline here, without Aaron Fisher, if Aaron Fisher is lying, the whole case falls apart, because Aaron Fisher is the only accuser for over 2 years of a grand jury investigation. They got nothing for over 2 years until Mike McQueary suddenly falls in their lap. And then here's what they do. Here's the key to how this whole thing goes down. So they have Aaron Fisher. They get Mike McQueary under circumstances that people don't understand, and I'd be happy to explain. But they get the 2 of them, and now they think they have these 2 pillars of steel. And now they go to each adult male, former member of the Second Mile charity, Jerry Sandusky's charity. They have a list of these men. This is a pool of people coming from crappy lives. Many of them have been abused themselves. Almost all of them are poor. They come from at-risk homes. This is a pool of people with effed up lives. And they simply go through each one of them and they say, hey, Jerry Sandusky ever do anything to you sexually or otherwise? And the vast majority say, no, what are you talking about? Jerry's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. But they find a couple, all of whom, by the way, almost all of whom know each other. 4 of them, at the time of arrest, are friends with each other. They're pictured together in Jerry Sandusky's book, 4 of the 6 accusers at the time of arrest. And several of them happen to be now, if you look at their Facebook pages, very prominent, if not quote-unquote professional gamblers, which I think plays a huge role here, because if you're going in this pool of at-risk former kids in this charity, who are the ones that are going to take a chance? Who are the ones that are going to roll the dice on what's going on here? It's going to be those with the gambling mentality. And that's what happened. And at the time of arrest, there are only 6 accusers, and only 2 of those 6 are making any kind of direct sexual allegation. The other 4 are vague, nebulous grooming allegations that could simply be misunderstandings based upon the fact that Jerry Sandusky is a guy with serious boundary issues, who grew up in a completely different generation, who grew up in a rec home where everyone was naked all the time and just didn't know what the heck he was doing with regard to societal norms. So, and both of those 2, Aaron Fisher and victim number 4, have massive, enormous credibility problems. And just to finish off on Aaron Fisher, I have interviews on the record with 12 different people, 12. And I'm talking about very close to Aaron Fisher's life, buddies during the time of the allegations, 2 very close aunts of his, 2 women who hosted a rally in his support when his book came out. parents of buddies of his, where he stayed over their house on numerous occasions during the time period of the abuse as well. And ex-girlfriends, 12 people in this category who have told me on the record they are sure that Aaron Fisher was never abused by Jerry Sandusky. A couple of these people, by the way, are sex abuse victims themselves, and that's partly why they know that Aaron was not abused by Jerry Sandusky. And conversely, even though I'm incredibly well known in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, where Aaron Fisher lives, not one person, not one, has ever come to me, and I'm incredibly accessible. People Facebook message me all the time about this case. Not one has ever said, John, you got this wrong about Aaron. I witnessed it at the time, or I've talked to Aaron, and I'm totally convinced he was actually abused. Not one. That's not possible. Not possible. Aaron Fisher lied, Mike McQueary got manipulated, and everybody else went along for the ride, and they got paid millions and millions of dollars, a total of almost $100 million. So there's your motivation for why someone would tell this kind of a story.
Okay.
And it paid off very well for Aaron Fisher.
So do you find it ironic at all that your theory is kind of being ignored by the general public when that's the very thing that Paterno was accused of? Ignoring the allegations from McQueary?
I think you need to look at the definition of irony. I'm not sure you have a good handle on that. I don't find it ironic at all. I don't find it even remotely relatable to what Paterno was falsely accused of doing, because Paterno, here's irony. I'll give you the actual definition of irony. Here's the ironic thing about Joe Paterno, and as you say, the public believing that he ignored what was told him by Mike McQueary, which is
right.
Bullcrap, which is utter bullcrap. He did exactly the right thing he was supposed to do. But here's irony. Here's the true definition of irony. You will be shocked to know, as would most of the public, that without Joe Paterno and his actions in this case, Jerry Sandusky is playing golf today. And that's not even a question. There is no chance that Jerry Sandusky even gets arrested if Joe Paterno simply says in his grand jury testimony, which would have been the truth, I don't remember what the hell Mike McQueary told me 10 years earlier. If he had just said that, Jerry Sandusky never gets arrested, because Mike McQueary would have nobody backing him up. The three administrators would have contradicted him dramatically, and the most prominent, respected man in the state of Pennsylvania, Joe Paterno, if he had simply said, I don't remember, which is, I think, what the truth was, then Mike would have been out on a limb all by himself. And the prosecution would not have taken that kind of a chance, because they know they would have had their heads handed to them, and Jerry never would have been arrested. So the idea that Joe Paterno gets blamed for not doing enough to investigate Jerry Sandusky is ironic, because Joe Paterno is the reason why Jerry Sandusky is going to die in prison.
So McQueary did actually go to Paterno? Is that what you believe? And you think that McQueary made up what he saw?
I'm not sure I understand the first part of your question. Are you suggesting that McQueary didn't go to Joe Paterno?
Okay, so no, I was just wondering if you believed that maybe he'd I wasn't aware that. So McQueary made it up way back in the day.
Here's what happened with Mike McQueary.
Yeah.
Okay, here's what happened with Mike McQueary. So Mike McQueary, by his telling the story, on a Friday night, goes into the locker room, although
right.
his explanation for why he's there doesn't make a lot of sense, and frankly, there's parts of it that are very troubling. But I'm willing to accept that he's there, and I'm willing to accept that he hears something in the shower, and that he then sees through a mirror for a couple of seconds Jerry Sandusky naked with a boy in the shower. I'm willing to accept all that. I'm willing to accept that that made him uncomfortable. I think that's perfectly natural and normal. I believe he then called his father, and he had a meeting with his father and a Dr. Dranoff, who testified numerous times. He asked Mike McQueary whether or not he saw anything sexual that night, and the doctor says that Mike told him numerous times, no, he did not, which is why they did not go to the police. If you see a sex act between a man and a boy, by the way, the first thing you do as a 6'5", 235-pound, 27-year-old former quarterback is you beat the shit out of Jerry Sandusky. That didn't happen. In fact, nothing happened. He didn't get the boy's name. He didn't say stop. He didn't get the boy to safety. Nothing. You know why he didn't? Because he didn't see a sex act. He saw two people in a shower. That's it. And we know this because we have the testimony of the boy that was there. So he tells Paterno the next day, and I believe he told Paterno in part because I think his father thought it would be a good idea to see Joe in person, because it just so happened that 2 days earlier, a job opened up, the wide receivers coaching job, when Kenny Jackson left Penn State to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers. This was a job that Mike McQuarrie wanted. He was a lowly graduate assistant at the time. Penn State was his alma mater. He was quarterback there, and he wanted to be the wide receivers coach. Interestingly, he didn't get the wide receivers coaching job, which is incredibly important, because if there really had been a cover-up of any sort at Penn State, the first thing you would do is, with the only witness in the cover-up, you give them an open job. He didn't get it because there was no cover-up. And so I believe that he told Joe Paterno, hey, I saw Jerry with a boy. It made me uncomfortable. Joe passes it up the food chain exactly as he's supposed to do. McQuarrie gets interviewed by the head of the campus police and by the athletic director. He tells them the same thing, that it was horseplay, that this was not a criminal act. They interview Jerry Sandusky. He offers to give them the name of the boy who was there. And Penn State, unfortunately, does not pursue that. I don't know why. I think it's possible that there was a technical, legal reason why they did not want to contact the boy. But that boy, all these years later, made a statement on the day Joe Paterno was fired that was intricately detailed, that had items and descriptions that only the boy in the shower could have possibly known about, where he makes it 100% clear Mike McQuarrie is not telling the truth. There was no sex act, no abuse that night whatsoever, and that Jerry Sandusky was the greatest thing that ever happened in his life. And he said this as a 24-year-old married sergeant in the Marine Corps. His name is Alan Myers. You can see the statement at framingpaterno.com, or if you Google the McQuarrie boy in the shower, it'll come up. This statement is amazing. So what happens is McQuarrie doesn't get talked to by police about this until 10 years later. And timing is so incredibly important here, because McQuarrie, when he finally is questioned, he testifies a couple of times that this occurred in March of 2002. But that's not true. That's not what happened. This event occurred in February of 2001. Now, that's really significant for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you really see a local legend having a sex act or abusing or raping, whatever the hell it is, a young boy in a shower, do you ever misremember what the hell year it was? And the second part is, do you think that you misremember it happening after 9/11 when it actually happened before 9/11? I would submit to you that that's not possible. And interestingly, you know how they found out they got the wrong date? Jerry Sandusky was the person that told them they got the wrong date, because Jerry knew who the boy in the shower was and had pieced together what had occurred and knew there was no chance that it was 2002. Jerry had no fear whatsoever of that episode being fully investigated. Unfortunately, because of the nuclear explosion that occurs with the Paterno firing, after that, and after everybody knows that Penn State's going to be paying out hundreds of, or almost $100 million, Alan Myers gets a lawyer, a very unscrupulous lawyer by the name of Andrew Shubin in State College. His mother happened to used to work for Andrew Shubin, and Andrew Shubin had been his lawyer in a DUI earlier that year. And lo and behold, all of a sudden, Alan Myers no longer wants to tell his story. He doesn't testify at trial because the prosecution doesn't like his story, and the defense is somehow stupidly afraid of him when they should have called him in retrospect. But the reality is that without all that money on the table, Alan Myers would have easily testified on Jerry Sandusky's behalf, but instead Alan Myers gets paid $3 million and lives in a very nice house on the river in Mill Hall, Pennsylvania, a house that I have been to, which has lots of warning signs about not wanting anyone to to visit unauthorized because obviously Alan Myers doesn't want people to be asking him any questions about why he's living in a big house for no apparent reason.
So would you say that if you were the defense lawyer in this case, do you think that Sandusky would have been found innocent? Obviously, you're not certified in the court of law. But...
Right. Let me put it this way. If I had given the closing argument and the opening arguments, and knowing what I know now, I feel very confident that Jerry Sandusky would have been acquitted.
So just curious, how many years did it take for you to place together all this research?
Well, I mean, I haven't been doing it every single day, but I would say that I would say that for most of the last 5 years, I've devoted to this case. Yeah. And
were you immediately struck with something seems off, or I think you said earlier at the beginning you thought that he was guilty, correct?
I thought Jerry was guilty.
Yeah, and so when was it? What was it that made you realize? When was the turning point for you?
Well, there were a couple things that made me go, ironically, to use that word again, one of the first things that made me go, was the Bob Costas interview, which was infamously horrendous from Jerry's perspective, and I agree that it was horrendous. As a matter of fact, it was so horrendous that I thought at the time, wait a minute, there's no chance that interview was given by the guy who Jerry Sandusky would have to be for this story to be real. Because Jerry Sandusky would have to be an incredibly well-trained pedophile criminal mastermind who has gotten away with this for about 40-some years. And that guy knows exactly how to answer the question, are you sexually attracted to young boys? Because they've thought about that their entire lives, about their sexual attraction to young boys. When Jerry Sandusky gets asked that by Bob Costas, it's clear, especially after I gotten to know Jerry a little bit, having interviewed him in prison for almost 6 hours, that's the first time he's ever pondered that question, which is why he hesitated. That's not consistent with what we would need to believe for him to be guilty. So that was the first moment when I thought, wow, he might be innocent.
Yeah.
But that was, you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But the moment that I knew for sure.
No, I mean, I was just curious because, for a lot of us, I mean, when we see something, we would tend to believe it, especially a major story like that with all the allegations. So I was just curious.
Let me tell you when I knew for sure he was innocent.
Okay.
So the second time I go back into prison, and at this point I've also done a lot of more investigation because, again, until my first interview with him, I was only focused on Penn State and Joe Paterno. I just presumed that Jerry was guilty. But after that first interview, I'm like, this doesn't make any flipping sense. So I investigated all of it, and I started to have real doubts about Aaron Fisher. And again, Aaron is the whole damn case here. McQueary and Fisher. That's all really you need to worry about are those two. Because if both of them are lying, the whole case is complete bullcrap. So I go back and this time I interview him with his wife, Dottie Sandusky, in the cell with us. And it's important to point out Jerry isn't in the same actual room. We can't have any contact with him. He's got handcuffs on behind a screen. And I asked a very strategic question. I asked both of them simultaneously, what was the first moment when you started to think, wow, this might not turn out okay for us? Now, the reason I asked this question was that if you're guilty, especially in this case, because this case had an incredibly long history before even the trial, there's 1,000 points where you might go, uh-oh, this is going to be bad. However, if you're innocent and you think it's all going to work out because you believe in the system, there's only one answer that makes any sense about what you would say about what was the first moment this might not work out okay. So Jerry immediately starts to cry. I mean, tears are gushing down his cheeks, and he, in very vivid detail, describes what his thinking was during the reading of the verdicts at the jury trial, which is when he first realized, you know what, this might not work out okay. And then Dottie, with even more tears in her eyes and even greater detail, expresses the exact same answer. It was the reading of the verdicts. And then just to make 100% sure I wasn't somehow being had, although I knew I wasn't because these people are not sophisticated or cynical enough to pull off this kind of a scam. I immediately, after getting out of prison, called Joe Amendola, Jerry Sandusky's defense attorney, and I said, Joe, I just asked Jerry and Dottie when was the first moment they thought this might not work out okay for them. What do you think their answers were? And he waited for a couple seconds, thought about it, and said, was it the reading of the verdicts? And I knew at that point, okay, we have two people here who have zero consciousness of guilt, both of whom would have to have massive amounts of consciousness of guilt for this story to be real. And when the evidence doesn't support guilt and there's no consciousness of guilt and the story of guilt makes no damn sense, I'm sorry, I come to the conclusion, guess what? He's not guilty.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that Sandusky interview that you had, that's pretty powerful stuff right there.
So if I convinced you guys that I might be right at least?
Made me think about it.
Yeah, I'm definitely thinking about it a little more than I was. I mean, I had never, to be honest, I'd never really considered the fact that he had a chance of being innocent with all the testimonies I had heard and stuff and with the media coverage.
Oh, now, hold on a second. Think about what you just said there. What you just said there is incredibly important. You just said, I had never really considered the idea that he might be innocent.
Yeah, that's correct. I really didn't think that kind of stuff would be made up, to be completely honest.
Okay, but see, you understand why that's important here, right?
Yes, I do.
It's only in that environment. I'm not criticizing you because you're not alone. You're in the
No, yeah. I think the question for me and a lot of others is just why would everyone lie?
Well, you want to see all their sports cars? I mean,
fair enough.
In all seriousness, I have pictures of all their sports cars. That Aaron Fisher's mom drives a Mercedes, a Porsche. Porsche, a Mercedes, and a Cadillac Escalade.
Jesus Christ! I wish I could get some of those.
Yeah, see, it's all of a sudden not that difficult to understand how this happened, is it? But the reason why they got away with it was because so many people are just like you. I never considered that he might be innocent. It's only in that environment when this kind of a fraud could be able to be perpetrated without a trace, without any other than me, any real blowback. Especially when the news media, I mean, my God, the news media has basically got the pom-poms out for these people. There's no scrutiny on them. Everything about this case is upside down. The good guys are the bad guys are the good guys, the white hats are the black hats, and the black hats are the white hats. I'm wearing a white hat. I'm one of a few good guys in this story. But I'm perceived as a black hat because the media needs me to have a black hat.
All right, so we're gonna we finished with the Penn State stuff. We're gonna go on to just some rapid fire, quick questions. End it on a more uplifting note, if that's okay.
Well, wait a minute. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
I never understood why people. It's funny you say that this wasn't uplifting. I'm telling you, there was no child sex abuse at Penn State. That should make people happy.
Well, I mean, in your alternative, there's innocent people in jail.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
That's not happy.
Yeah, Jerry Sandusky will die in prison, wrongly convicted. Yeah. So either way, it's still.
Fair enough. Good point. All right, so hit me with your questions.
Do Twitter replies ever get to you?
Do Twitter replies ever get to me?
Like, do they ever make you feel bad about people saying, "Oh, John, you're a moron" or something like that on Twitter?
No, I enjoy it when people say I'm a moron.
Us too. We enjoy that.
That's why I retweet most of those people. I will admit that maybe 1 out of 100 might say something that really gets under my skin. I guess the ones that really get under my skin are the media members. People who are not just, some nameless person on Twitter, but people who are actual supposed journalists who are just complete, utter morons and who will not address the facts at all, especially when it comes to Penn State. That gets to me. But otherwise, my skin is pretty much rhinoceros thick at this point.
Okay.
So O.J. Simpson is getting out of jail this year. Are you scared?
Well, I'm not convinced that that's going to happen yet. I know that there's conventional wisdom that is likely to occur. It might occur. Should I be scared? I don't know how much you know about that whole situation, but and maybe this is just a coincidence, but there are people who were involved in that case for why he's in prison right now who believe that I'm the reason why that whole thing went down. So I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, but I don't know that OJ knows that I am partially responsible for why he's in prison. I don't know that. So should I be afraid? Maybe, but
He's
hope
probably
he
a lot of
doesn't
time to
get out.
think in prison just about how everything happened.
I'm sorry?
He's just probably had a lot of time to think about everything and stuff. I don't know. Anyways, so I'm a golf guy. I don't know about yourself, but is Tiger back after the incidents last week? Will we get the old Tiger back?
Oh no, never.
Never?
I wrote a I know about very few things in life, but the things I do know about, I really know.
Okay.
Like, for instance, Penn State, and Tiger is well. Speaking of Tiger, I don't know if you can see that, but
Okay.
there you go.
That's pretty cool.
Tiger from the 2008 U.S. Open, and I got a couple other signed photos of Tiger. I wrote a front page story in the Louisville weekly newspaper previewing the 2014 PGA Championship, which was in Louisville, where the graphic was Tiger Woods being put into a casket and buried because I knew it was over at that point. And I think I've been pretty well vindicated on that. Tiger is done. There is no coming back. Now, will he ever play professional golf again? I think that's possible. But there is no chance that Tiger Woods ever wins a major championship again. If he did, it would be a bigger deal than Nicklaus winning in 1986 Masters. And I would be rooting for it, by the way, because it'd be a hell of a story. But I just don't see how in the world you put the Humpty Dumpty back together at this point, especially when we're living in an era where I think the prime of a golfer's life is now about 27 years old. I mean, the technology has completely changed the game. Golf is now almost like tennis with regard to, the age when you hit your prime. And experience is no longer nearly the advantage that it used to be. Inexperience is no longer a disadvantage. And, Tiger, even before the latest back problems, was really barely an above average distance when it came to hitting a golf ball because the technology and fitness had totally changed the game. Basically, what happened was that a whole bunch of people, athletes who never would have taken up golf without Tiger Woods ever existing, ended up taking over for him. If Tiger got usurped by his own greatness. Because without him, I doubt that Dustin Johnson and people like that would be playing golf. They'd be playing other sports. So Tiger's done, as unfortunate as that is.
It's sad to hear. You got the next one?
Okay, so this is more of a political question, but make America great again, or was America already great?
Well, I guess it depends on your definition of greatness. We're the best country in the world, so by definition,
I would agree.
I'm sorry?
I would agree. We're the best country in the world.
So when you're the best, I guess that means inherently you're great because no one's greater than you are. But are we as great as we used to be? I don't think so. I think we've become a frivolous nation. I'm embarrassed by what we are. A great nation, ironically, you can use the word of the interview, does not elect Donald Trump president of the United States. So So inherently, by virtue of the election of Donald Trump, it kind of goes against the argument that America is great. So we're on the decline, and it's just really, to me, the great question about America right now is how long can we, basically live off of our laurels? Mm-hmm. I don't know the answer to that. I wish I did. I have 2 young children, and so I don't know if.
Yeah, I'm the father of one.
I'm sorry?
No, I was just saying I'm the father of one as well.
Yeah, so I just don't know whether or not we're going to make it to the end of their lives. Selfishly, I hope we make it to the end of my life. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I am
okay.
positive. I am positive that at some point in the near future, we're headed for a cataclysmic collapse.
Is that because of climate change?
No, not because of climate change.
Okay, so next topic: build the wall or drain the swamp. Which comes first?
Well, I would rather drain the swamp.
Okay.
Neither's going to happen.
Okay.
No,
that's a good take.
Donald Trump is not going to drain the swamp. I mean,
is he the swamp?
Oh, he's as swampy as they get. I mean, when your chief advisor is your son-in-law, and he's the son of a mobster criminal, that's pretty freaking swampy. But there's never going to be a wall, and there's not going to be any draining of the swamp.
Okay.
So who won the election for Trump? Was it the Russian hackers or was it Seth Rich?
Well, Seth Rich had nothing to do with the Russian hacking. The Russian hacking, I think, did help Trump because it gave the news media the ability to portray that this email situation. See, most people, all they knew was that Hillary had this massive email problem, and it kept, the hacking, even though it wasn't related to it, it kept that perception in the news, and in a faux fairness, it allowed the news media to create this false equivalence between what was happening with Hillary and the Democrats and whatever negative news was happening with Trump. So
yeah,
but I don't know that it was decisive, the Russian hacking. To me, this is how close. It's so ludicrous that Trump claims that he won this massive victory. Not only did he lose the popular vote by 3 million votes, but you could really argue that if the wind blew, almost literally, if the wind blew in the other direction in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and a fairly small number of Hillary voters decide to go to the polls that day, then she wins. Because it was less than 100,000 votes.
Yeah, I think the saying was Trump won the woke vote.
Well, there was a lot of people who apparently never woke up that day and didn't vote for Hillary. Hillary was a horrible candidate, and to me, the greatest myth about that election was that somehow there was this massive tsunami of Trump voters. There's no evidence of that. I mean, there was a little bit of evidence of it in Pennsylvania and in Florida. Other than that, there was no evidence at all. Trump didn't do better than Romney in most states, and Romney was going up against a much, much, much better candidate in President Obama than Trump was in Hillary Clinton. It's just that there was a reverse tsunami, and Hillary's voters, a lot of them never showed up because she was such a terrible candidate. So Trump is the accidental president. It's an incredible stroke of luck that he won. Unfortunately, it's a stroke of luck that I think the Republican Party is going to be ruining for the rest of my life.
On another lighter note, the NBA Finals are going on right now. Will the Cavs come back?
I used to be a huge basketball fan, and I like LeBron James, but I haven't been watching that much. Based upon what I would have seen, I would say no. If only.
Yeah, I mean they're down 2-0. They've lost both games by close to 20 points.
Yeah,
is that right?
Points.
Well, but also you got to remember, obviously what happened last year is context for this, and so it's not as if the Warriors are going to be overconfident. So,
yeah.
So I would say that logically that the Warriors will win.
All right. Edward Snowden, hero or villain?
I would say mostly villain.
I agree with you.
Mostly villain. Okay. And do you have a World Series prediction?
It's early, we know, but let's hear it.
When I was a kid, I used to be able to listen. This is going to blow your guys' minds since you're young. I used to listen on the radio to Philadelphia Phillies doubleheaders, and had no concerns.
Yeah, if you say the Phillies, that's terrible. Come on.
Well, the Phillies were good back then, but
Yeah, back then, I'm sure. But
my point is that I never got bored even listening on the radio to doubleheaders.
Yeah.
Now I can't watch a full inning of Major League Baseball on television. So the Yankees look pretty freaking good at this point.
That's who I have. Yankees over Cubs in 6. Heard that here.
Well, that would be an interesting World Series and certainly would be good for television, right?
Oh, yeah.
A lot of pinstripes.
Oh, yeah. I think that's what it is.
All right. Anything else?
No, I think that wraps it up. It was great having you on.
Thank you very much for your time.
Well, I appreciate your guys' open-mindedness, and if people are interested in finding out more about the Penn State case, make sure you go to Framing Paterno, www.framingpaterno.com. The framing is figurative, not literal. I'm an anti-conspiracy person, not a conspiracy theorist, and I hope people will check that out to find out more about why I'm right about the biggest travesty in the history of sports media.
All right, thanks, John. We'll get this up hopefully tomorrow.
Yeah, will you send me the link? This will be a YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube link. Yep.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, have a good one.
Say it for. Yeah, boy.
Holy shit.
Yeah, you guys kind of got owned for like a portion.